One of the things I'll do to you today is remind you of some of the things you learned in that course if you took a very standard sort of Keynesian kind of a course. But don't despair. It has a payoff to the way that I do it as opposed to the way your textbook did it or possibly your professor. Although I've talked to a few students who had macroeconomics from a very Austrian-oriented professor. That's encouraging. This lecture features Keynes and Hayek and puts them head to head. And actually, I think I can claim that that really hasn't been done much before. And even though Keynes and Hayek themselves were together for quite some time, or at least not far separated, Keynes at Cambridge and Hayek at LSE, and they did battle both head-to-head, personally, and in the journals. Even during the most dangerous part of the war, the whole LSE moved to Cambridge, and Hayek helped or Keynes helped Hayek find a place to live. I mean, they were friends, and so they had more chance there to talk to one another. But I think there's a sense in which they never did quite go head to head. They never quite got to the root of the issues that separated them, at least in a pedagogically effective way. And so that's what I want to do or try to do this morning. There's Keynes and Hayek there. You can see that they were contemporaries almost. Well, Keynes was 16 years older than Hayek, and Hayek mentions that more often than you might think, suggesting that he was a little bit in awe of Keynes, if just because of Keynes's status in the profession. Putting them head to head actually is not quite as difficult as you might think. There they are. Okay, a rare photo. Looks like Keynes might be enjoying that a little more than Hayek. I don't know. But in the end, Keynes, of course, won out. I would argue, a lot of people would argue, for political reasons and not economic reasons. Not that one theory was actually shown to be superior to the other, but one theory, namely Keynes, had politically appealing policy implications. I think that's why that Keynes won out. Now, very briefly, I want to show you what to look for in this little show. I say visions and framework, and I just contrast the two visions. And the emphasis here is on the circular flow idea. Keynes' vision of the economy suggests a circular flow. People work to eat and eat to work. Okay, they work, they make money, they spend money, buying things from the firms that they work for, collectively speaking. So earning and spending are brought into balance, it turns out, by the level of employment. The economy can be robust, it can be vibrant, and you have high earning and high spending, or it can be depressed, and you have low earning and low spending. And it's that equation of earning and spending that causes the economy to settle into an equilibrium, not necessarily one that we're happy with. It might be the depths of the Depression. What contrasts with circular flow is means ends. Hayek had a means ends framework, which suggests that we employ means to achieve ends, but it takes time. They're transformed over time into consumable output. We start with labor and other factors of production, go through stages of production, and over time those inputs are transformed into output. So he's looking at the temporal dimension of the economy, and who could deny that there's a significant, substantial, important temporal dimension in the business of producing goods and services? Well, it's not really a rhetorical question. Frank Knight denied it. He argued that production and consumption are in effect simultaneous, and we can ignore time. And incidentally, it was Frank Knight, not Keynes, who invented the circular flow as a pedagogical device. Several years, I think 1933, before the general theory was written. Keynes' distinction is not that he invented circular flow. He didn't. Knight did. But what Keynes did was develop a theory in which that relationship is absolutely dominant to the exclusion of all other relationships in his theory. Now, when we get graphical about it, the circular flow appears as a Keynesian cross. That seems kind of odd. How do you get from a circle to a cross? Well, we'll see that shortly. And the intersection of the cross, that's the intersection of C plus I plus G in the 45-degree line, shows you the level of income and therefore the level of employment that brings income and expenditure into equilibrium. That's macro 101. Hayek's graphics is the Hayekian triangle. And that's what puts up front, from the beginning, the temporal dimension of the production process. Stages of production are aligned from early stage to late stage, which yields then the consumable output. If the economy is working right, if prices, wages, and interests are adjusting to their market clearing levels, then the output is in accordance with the time preferences and other preferences of the consumers. That's the Hayekian vision and graphics. I'm going to start with a circular flow, something you've seen before, I'm sure, where you have business organizations. That's really just a shell. It's an organizational structure, way of arranging economic affairs. And down below we have factors of production, importantly including the workers and the consumers. They're wearing two hats. They're people as consumers, people as workers, or people as other factor owners, resource owners, and so on. Well, you know how the circular flow goes. You have workers and other factor services, but in Keynesian economics, the other factor services sort of drop out of sight pretty quickly. It's all workers. So workers are supplying the input, major input to the production process, and for that, they get paid. It's called income, okay? If you have any sense of symmetry, you know that's only half the picture. On the other side, you have goods and services being provided by the firm and used by, guess who, these same people that work for the firm, not firm by firm basis, but collectively on an economy-wide basis. And they don't get them for nothing. They make expenditures. They buy what the firm is producing. And that's a circular flow that you find in almost any textbook in macroeconomics. The big difference between their rendition and my rendition is my circular flow actually circulates. Look at that. There it goes. Okay? Now, when you look at the two halves of the circulation, you might ask, well, what I'm doing here is I'm using the speed to represent how robust or how vibrant the economy is, okay? And what really gives rise to this income? Well, it's those expenditures. Well, how are people to make that much in the way of expenditures? Well, they've got the income, you see. It's a circular flow, okay? There's no unilateral cause and effect. It's they cause one another, okay? It circulates. That's kind of a sluggish economy, but if we get lucky, it might get more robust. Let's see if we can speed it up a little bit, okay? You know, it's faster, okay? But it probably won't last, Keynes says. It might slow down, okay? It's back to this. And that's the whole vision of the economy. It's that's the way capitalism is according to Keynes, that there's nothing inherent in the system that will cause it to circulate at this speed rather than that speed. And you'd be lucky if it circulates at a speed that actually fully employs the economy. And even if you're lucky, your luck won't hold out. It'll probably slow down. You'll have unemployment, and you need some extra market force to come in and speed it up a little bit. Okay. And, of course, that's government policy, fiscal policy, monetary policy, and all that. And even here we can see how we get from the circle to the cross, because when we plot the axis with expenditures on the vertical axis and income on the horizontal, we're really plotting the speed of each side of that circulation. Okay, so plot the expenditures vertically income horizontally, and that's where you get the 45-degree line that says they have to be equal. They have to be going at the same speed. They have to be equal for the economy to be in equilibrium. And you can even see that if they weren't equal, suppose expenditures fell off while income was still being paid out to produce goods and services. Well, those goods and services would just be piling up at the firm as excess inventories. And that by itself would set off a process where there'd be layoffs, cutbacks, unemployment, the economy would spiral down until income once again equaled expenditures. That's the whole Keynesian framework, okay? And there he is, okay, Keynes. Now that contrasts pretty radically with Hayek. With Hayek, we have a means-ends framework, which is illustrated by the Hayekian triangle, okay? And here we're emphasizing the time dimension on that horizontal axis. And that triangle produces output over time. So you see this goods going through, goods in process, going from early stage to late stage, which makes no appearance in circular flow, of course. And even more significantly, the triangle can change shapes. As we saw in the previous lecture that I gave. Let's see if we can make it change shape. Yeah, it can change shapes, okay? And that's something unique to the Austrian theory and totally an eclipse in Keynesian theory. In fact, one of Keynes's early chapters that's called glibly sort of choice of units, it's called. He just makes the assumption of a fixed structure of industry, which with an Austrian interpretation means a fixed Hayekian triangle. It doesn't change shapes. That's just one of his underlying assumptions, sort of a throat-clearing assumption that he makes before he talks about the circular flow. Okay. Now, back to the circular flow for a minute. As I've already said, income needs to equal expenditures, whether they're going fast or slow, to be in equilibrium, and expenditures are expenditures by consumers, investors, and the government. And to simplify things for this presentation, I'm going to talk about a wholly private economy, so we're going to get rid of government. Feels good anyhow, okay, y equals c plus I. That's a wholly private economy. And then we're going to put the income and expenditures on the two axes to get the Keynesian cross, okay? So there's expenditures vertically and income horizontally. And just realize that what you're looking at there is the two halves of the circular flow. And we're recognizing that the two halves has to be going at the same rate, which means that you've got to be on that 45-degree line with y equal to E. Economists use Y for income. It's not that they can't spell, but some of them can. But capitalized investment underlies interest, and so income becomes Y, it turns out. That's the significance of the 45-degree line. And there's the first component of expenditures, consumption expenditures. You learn that in Principles of Econ. And what you learn is that it's simply a linear relationship. The consumption is some magnitude that you'd spend even if temporarily you didn't have a job, plus some proportion of the income you actually do make. That's C equals A plus BY. A is greater than 0. B is between 0 and 1. And what's significant here for the Austrians is that I should have put in a period after the equation, which means that consumption doesn't depend on the interest rate. In other words, the Austrians would say how much you spend and how much you save will depend in part on the rate of interest. How much are banks paying you to save? If you save, you're not spending on consumption goods. So the interest rate ought to be factored in here, but it's not in the Keynesian view. And Keynes simply denies it. He said interest rate has nothing to do with people's consumer behavior. They spend as a matter of habit on the basis strictly of their income. Dress it up, yeah, A is the intercept, B is the slope, we know that. Now investment just gets piled on top of consumption, so we get C plus I. Notice here that Keynes simply adds the two components of expenditures. He's not contrasting them. You know, say we can spend on I or we can spend on C. No, he says add them up and get total spending and compare it with total income. Investment, as it shows here, has nothing to do with the interest rate either. Keynes threw that out. He threw out the whole vulnerable funds market. Doesn't have anything to do with the interest rate. It's only based on profit expectations, and those expectations aren't well anchored in economic reality. That becomes the wild card in Keynesian economics, the animal spirits, as he says, that moves investors to invest more, invest less. It gives them cold feet sometimes. They lose fire in the belly. They are pessimistic rather than optimistic. That's all of the language that Keynes uses to explain why investment can shift up and down pretty unexpectedly, where consumption just sits there. Okay, so again, that's the Keynesian view. The three categories are identified in terms of their stability properties. Consumption, that's stable. You tell me what income is, I'll tell you what consumption is. Investment, that's the wild card. That's unstable. And G, government, that's stabilizing. Okay, that's the Keynesian view. We need the government in there to offset changes that would otherwise exist in C plus I and bring the economy to a full employment level of income. So this shows you then that if the income measured horizontally has to equal consumption plus investment, that's the idea. That's what the 45-degree line gives to you. That's what that says down below there. Okay. Now, the level of equilibrium is not necessarily full employment. In fact, Keynes says only by accident that it would be full employment in a wholly private economy, only by accident. But we're entitled to make the assumption, if only for pedagogical purposes, that, okay, so the accident happened, we happen to be at full employment. We'll start out at full employment. And still we're going to be Keynesian because Keynes says it won't last. The economy will crash. And how can we show that full employment? Well, let's show it the way we did Monday and recognize that that vertical distance right there of C, that's what's being spent on consumption, and the rest is being spent on investment. We could put those on a production possibilities frontier. And show that if you're at full employment, that means you're on the PPF. Okay? Now, the textbooks don't do that, and Keynes didn't do that, but I did that. All right? But that's what it means. Now, Keynes has a different way of showing full employment. He simply looks at that level of income and sees if labor markets are clearing. And when he looks at labor markets, he takes the wage rate as given. For the given wage, he calls it the going wage, and given supply, is the demand for labor sufficiently strong to clear the market at the going wage? And so he would look at this labor market. I'll pull it down there in a little spotlight there, and see, sure enough, the economy is fully employed. The labor market is clearing. For Keynes, though, it's not that the wage rate adjusted to clear the market. It's that the demand for labor happens to be strong enough to clear the market at the going wage. That's his idea. That's what this says here, that there's a going wage rate, and that it was brought into existence during some period when the economy was not suffering any macroeconomic problems. So evidently the market, even for Keynes, works well enough that during some period of time, a wage rate emerges that clears labor markets. But then that wage rate becomes entrenched and is supported by labor unions, and it doesn't change, or it's sticky downwards. It tends not to change. And so any change in demand now is going to give us unemployment if demand falls. It's going to give us inflation if it rises. Okay. Now, look, we can show income even in that labor market, that little rectangular area there. The wage rate times the number of workers is labor income. And Keynes treats labor income as if it's total income. That's why I call it labor-based macroeconomics, because he knows it's not. He knows there are other kinds of income, but he says, well, they always move up and down together anyhow. And besides, labor income is the biggest part of total income. So you're safe in just treating income as all labor income, even though we know it's not. And sometimes he even says if there are other incomes, we'll treat them as the labor equivalent. Okay, so If you're selling resources, well, what's the labor equivalent of those resources? It's still labor income, he says. Okay. Now, so I just marked that on the graph as Y sub FE. That means full employment. And that's it. We've got full employment. Now we just hope. We just hope that that C plus I keeps intersecting at that level of income. Otherwise, we'll have unemployment if it goes to the left, or inflation if it goes to the right. Keynes, of course, was more worried about unemployment because he wrote in the middle of the Depression. Now let me bring back the circular flow, and you can see, yeah, E equals Y. We've got it. All right. Now here Keynes is saying, what's going to cause the economy to collapse? And he says, well, it's just investors that lose their nerve, waning of animal spirits. He uses that term 3 times in a page and a half. You take that to mean he means it. Okay. Who knows what those investors will do next? And they have a herd mentality. They all do the same thing. He went to a seafood restaurant once. It was waiting in the lobby and watching the fish swim across the aquarium. And he noticed that well before the fish reached the end of the auditorium, they all turned and went back the other way. And they all turned at once. Who knows why? No, he wasn't tapping on the glass or anything, you know. Who knows why? And he didn't know why, but he says, that's just the way investors are. They're optimistic, and then the economy goes in the dumper. But he was here to tell us the consequences of the switch, and not to try to explain the switch. Ask the people who understand fish and investors a little better. Okay. Well, now let's watch this graphically. I think we can do it. Yeah. Let me play that again so you can see what's going on. If investment falls, it means that I simply shifts down. Okay. So that's a hollow point now. It's no longer an equilibrium. Okay. And think what this means. This means that now Y doesn't equal C plus I plus G. Expenditures are a little short, and the difference is excess inventories. In other words, people are working and they're producing this junk, but expenditures, investment expenditures, have fallen, and so they're not buying the junk. So it must be piling up as inventory at the level of the firm. We should be able to see that. Let's see if we can see that. There's the inventory piling up. Okay. Now, that's what, I mean, this is in the textbook. It's not quite, pitched this way, but that's what's in the textbook. Now, when that happens, of course, firms cut back. And then they cut back to lay off workers. And when they lay off workers, income goes down. When the income goes down, expenditures goes down. The economy crashes. And it will go down until, once again, Y equals C plus I plus G. Okay? So there's the economy crashing. And now we have a new level of income. If we check our labor market there, here I'm showing that this is where this delta I, that's the change in investment, and the delta Y, and they're related by that little multiplier. That's the Keynesian multiplier, the investment multiplier. And that's how we get in Keynesianism from the theory to the policy, that the government should spend essentially the amount of delta I to goose the economy back up to where it was. So half of a macro course at college level is giving this multiplier a workout and prescribing policy, how to get expenditure up to go back to full employment. Okay. Now, if you check the labor market, what you see is the demand for labor has fallen. And we have unemployment because the wage rate didn't change. It's sticky downwards or fixed or stuck or whatever you want to say. So this is key to the understanding Keynesianism, that the going wage keeps going even after the market conditions that gave rise to it are gone. Okay. And without that part of the theory, you don't get the unemployment. You just get a fall in the wage rate. Okay. Now that's as far as I'm going to take the Keynesian view by itself. And what I want to do now is show how we can morph, it seems impossible, how we can morph from there to the Hayek view. And yet we can do it. Let me show you. Start with the Keynesian view, and let's bring back our little representation of full employment using the PPF. So the PPF is a better way, I think, to keep track of full employment because it doesn't make this ad hoc assumption about wages can't change, okay? And it just shows you're on the PPF. And it gives us a link to the Austrians, so the Austrians kind of keep watch on the Keynesians to see what they're really up to. Okay. The Keynesians, though, of course, they're just going to look at that labor market. That's all they're interested in there. Now, let's look at the waning animal spirits. And you know what's going to happen on the left diagram. The thing's going to shift down, it's going to crash. But what I want you to see now is what happens with the PPF. There it shifts down. Now watch, when the economy crashes, look at the point on the PPF. Where's it going to go? It's going to go interior to the PPF because investment has fallen. You have less investment. And when income fell, consumption fell. Not that consumption line shifted, but that you moved down along it as income fell. So watch the economy crash. Okay, so you move interior to the frontier. Now, this is what drives the Austrians nuts and other non-Keynesians, that this counts in the Keynesian view as an equilibrium level of income. So I've made that a solid dot in the PPF diagram, but it's clearly disequilibrium in the sense that you've got idle resources, you're below full employment, and so on. Okay. Now, let's let it crash a little more because, you know, once it starts crashing, what's that going to do to the level of optimism, okay, or to the animal spirits? You're going to wane further, right? And so, well, there again, you see that we've got unemployment. And so this shows you that you could have a further waning just because we're in a downslide now. And we're going to crash again and again watching the PPF diagram. Okay? We've gone further into the interior of the frontier. Now it turns out that those dots, those on the PPF, line up, and they trace out a straight line. Here we're really in the depths of the Depression, labor-wise. But let's look at this straight line, movements inside the frontier and beyond if you get into an inflationary situation. Trace out the linear relationship showing how consumption varies with investment. So you can put several dots there. 4 dots are enough to determine a straight line, and there it is. Now, that line is implied by the Keynesian theory, okay, which means that the economy is constrained, according to Keynes, to move along that line, which means it can't move along the PPF. It can only be on it. You should be so lucky. He says only by accident or design. By accident, it just happened so. Investors just happen to invest the right amount. Or by design, that means that the government has spent just the right amount to offset problems in the economy. What's he ruling out? He's ruling out any kind of a spontaneous order or market process that keeps us on the frontier. Okay, so it has to be on that line. If you're math inclined and you want to do the doodling, all you have to do is write that equation, C equals A plus BY, and then write the equilibrium conditions, which is income equal expenditures, Y equals E, and Y equals C plus I then. Okay, and solve it expressing C as a function of I. In other words, eliminate Y from those 2 equations, and you'll get the equation of that line. It's just that simple. And yet that doesn't show up in any of the textbooks. You never see the equation of that line. I think I can show you. Well, you can see on this diagram here that if investment collapsed completely and we move clear down here, then you'd trace across and you'd hit that intercept there. I think I show that. Let's see. Yeah, that's just a construction line to show you I've got that straight line drawn in the right place. And I have solved that equation, and that's the equation. C equals A over 1 minus B plus B over 1 minus B times I. You get it just from those 2 other simple equations. Now, get this. Keynes solved it too. Keynes knew this, and he said so in his 1937 article, and I'll show you his example. Let's make a simplifying assumption. I think I put this here on the script. Let A equal 0. Well, it doesn't equal 0, but that's what Keynes says. Okay, so if we use a real simple construction, A is 0, B is 0.9, and then this equation, the first term drops out, and B over 1 minus B becomes 9, and you get C equals 9 times I. So there has to be that kind of a hardcore relationship between C and I, and it's a positive relationship. C and I always move up and down together. They move at different rates because of the multiplier, but C and I always move up and down together. And that precludes the possibility of moving along the frontier. Hayek students and Keynes students understood this. Abba Lerner was a Hayek student who eventually joined the Keynesian forces. And Abba Lerner said at the time that the big difference between Hayek and Keynes was that with Hayek, C and I can move opposite one another as along the frontier, and with Keynes they always move up and down together. Okay, so I've got it there graphically. So here's what Keynes writes. This is in his 37 article. He says, if, for example, the public are in the habit of spending 9/10 of their income on consumption goods, it follows that if entrepreneurs were to produce consumption goods at a cost of more than 9 times the cost of investment goods, they are producing some part of their output could not be sold at the price which covers the cost of production. So he said this, essentially, that relationship has to hold. And he goes on to say, the formula is not, of course, quite so simple as this. Well, right, because A is not 0, it's 1, or it's some positive value, it's not 1. He says, but there's always a formula, more or less of this kind, relating the output of consumption goods, which it pays to produce, to the output of investment goods. This conclusion appears to me to be quite beyond dispute. Yet the consequences which follow from it are at the same time unfamiliar and of the greatest possible importance. So what he's saying is that the economy is constrained to move along that line that gives us a hardcore relationship between investment and consumption, such that they always move in the same direction, all right? Which makes movement along the curve impossible, okay? Now what I want to do is bring the interest rate into play in a way that Keynes shouldn't object to. In fact, I can find this in Keynes and even highlighted. If I look at saving and investment in my lower diagram, it's the same quadrant I had on Monday, I can show what they must look like if the economy is just by accident in equilibrium, okay? Because the loan market is clearing. You have an interest rate that clears the labor market, saving equals investment, and that's the Austrian portrayal. Even Keynes says, yeah, we could think of it that way. He doesn't think of it that way, but yeah, we can think of it that way. Sometimes in the general theory, Keynes actually argued that saving is what it is independent of interest. In other words, it doesn't slope upward, it's vertical. And investment is what it is independent of interest. It doesn't slope upward, it's vertical. But other times he says, oh, well, yeah, they have these conventional slopes, upward sloping saving, downward sloping investment, but they always move together. They always move together, and so they can't possibly determine the rate of interest. So he argues it both ways. Keynes argues like a lawyer. I don't know if I should say that. Do we have any lawyers in here, any budding lawyers? I don't want to offend anybody, okay? But you know how lawyers argue? They argue, my client didn't borrow your lawnmower. And it was already broken when you lent it to him. And it was still in perfect condition when he returned it. So the lawyer doesn't care which one of those arguments you buy. Whichever one you buy, if you buy one, you got your client off the hook. Okay. So Keynes was saying, don't pay attention to the interest rate. Don't pay attention to the interest rate. Because either it doesn't affect either saving or investment, or the two curves always move together, and so it can't determine the interest rate. Okay. Now, we've got a third perspective here. That just tells you what I said. Okay. So now, look, with the loan market in play, when we're going to decrease investment, we show it two ways. We're going to show it as before. That curve is going to shift down. But if there's a decrease in investment, then the demand for loanable funds to finance that investment is going to shift to the left. Okay? So when I show the waning of animal spirits, you'll see it both up here and down here. Now watch. There it is. There's the waning of animal spirits. Oh, look, see, Hayek could come up and say, well, look, the interest rate's too high. It will fall. You move along the investment schedule and encourage people to invest even though their spirits are on the wane because you give them a lower interest rate. And you'll have an equality of saving and investment again. And Keynes says, no, Hayek. Before that gets a chance to happen, something else happens. Can you guess what happens? The economy crashes. It's actually not too much of an overstatement to say that in Keynesian economics, if anything happens, the economy crashes. Okay, because he's assuming that interest rate, prices, and wages are all fixed at some level, and if it's working now, then if there's a change in market conditions, it's not going to work very well. Okay, so the economy crashes, and when it crashes, then what do you think is going to happen to saving? It's going to shift left too. If people aren't earning money, they can't save as much. Okay, so when the economy crashes, let's watch it crash. Saving shifts too. There it is. So we've saved Keynes. You know, if saving shifts too, then we've got the market clearing at the same interest rate, but we've got less income and we're inside the PPF. That's Keynes. That's what he says. In fact, and here to me this is the smoking gun, or even better. And it's this. No one else seems to notice this. Okay, but that diagram right there, to make that point, is in the general theory. And it's the only diagram in the general theory. And that's the point Keynes is making. I copied it out of the general theory. Let's see. Okay, we're in the dumper again. We get that. Okay. There's the page 180 is where it is. There's the page, and it's a sinful diagram because you see how that vertical axis is labeled? This is the ultimate sin. Don't draw a graph and not label it, okay? Just don't do it. You'll lose points on my exam every time. Okay? But what's up there? Well, he's talking about investment and saving, and so that's what's up there. It's saving. Now, that's R. That means interest rate for what rate, or rate of return, or whatever. So he's got the diagram cocked sideways. That's okay. I'm going to switch it. So here I've used the same diagram. I just sort of flipped it around so that we have interest rate up here, and down here needs to be saving and investment. He has several points to make that turn out to be false starts, and he uses some other shifts on this that kind of clutter things up. He says, well, it could be this way or it could be that way, but no, it's something else. So let's get out his false starts, throw them out, and then let's label the diagrams like they're supposed to be, saving and investment and interest rate. Okay. Now, what's his point? His point is that there's the equilibrium level of interest and equilibrium saving equal investment. He's saying if demand shifts to the left, don't count on the interest rate changing because supply will shift to the left too. Why? Because the economy crashes, reduces income, and reduces saving. And it will shift to the left just the amount that will give you an unchanged level of interest and less investment and less saving. So that's the diagram in the general theory. Okay? So I claim that my interpretation of Keynes here is absolutely true to the scripture. It's exactly what he was claiming. Okay. He even says, let me back that up for a minute. I'm paraphrasing. Keynes believed that a shift in investment demand would be accompanied by a matching shift in the savings schedule. And the part I've left out is his qualification in terms of perverse things that could happen to the interest rate. He says that assuming no change in liquidity preference or in the money supply, by that he means if there's an increase in liquidity preference, which he argues later there will be, it causes the interest rate to rise when it really needed to fall. Okay, so it makes things even worse. Okay, now we're just back to where we were before. So again, that is what's in the general theory. That's Keynes talking to you right there. Okay, now to align this a little more strongly with Hayek, I'm going to look at a possible change in saving. He denied that an increase in saving would have the effect imagined by the loanable funds theorist, and certainly the effect imagined by Keynes. And instead, he had this paradox of thrift. And look what he says down here. This is directly from the general theory. Every attempt to save more by reducing consumption, yes, that's the way you save more, will so affect incomes that the attempt necessarily defeats itself. That's a very strong statement. You save, you'll be sorry. You'll throw the economy in the dumper. Okay, that's the message. Now, how so? Well, we can see it in the diagrams. If people save, it means consumption shifts down. So does C plus I, but only because I is sitting on top of C. You find this in the general theory. You don't find it emphasized because he says, fortunately, people don't decide to save more. We're happy about that. Because if they did, the economy would be in trouble. So let's see if I've got this on here now. Okay, I want to play that again because I want to show you this, that if that consumption changes, then so does that, I call it the Keynesian demand constraint, so does that constraint because the equation has A in the intercept term, C equals A over 1 minus B. So if that shifts down, so does that, okay? And if people save more, that means the savings shifts out, doesn't it? Increase in savings at rightward shift. So you need to be looking at this, this, and this all at the same time. Watch the shift. All right. So we've got more saving, that is less consumption. That affects the demand constraint. And the increase in saving is also a shift outward here. Okay. Again, let's bring in Hayek, and he says, well, look, Maynard, there's an increase in saving that's going to lower interest rates, that's going to increase investment, that's going to tailor the production structure to fit the new time preferences. That was a story we told Monday, wasn't it? And what did Keynes say? No, Hayek, because before that could happen, something else will happen. What is it? You guys are learning, okay? Everything crashes. So watch it crash. Now, see, when it crashes, you get the spiraling downward. And when it crashes, you're going to get a movement down to this demand constraint. And when it crashes, then savings can go back to where it was. In other words, it shifted out because there was a preference change. It shifted back because income fell. Okay? So let me pull the trigger again. I'm just showing you I got it lined up right, see? Let me pull the trigger again. Okay? So here you are in the dumper again. Okay? And in fact, this is exactly what Keynes called the paradox of thrift. Hence the paradox. Try to save more and you'll still earn less. And you'll be in the dumper. That's Keynes's paradox of thrift, and you can see how it works. Okay? I think we're doing good on time here. Now, I still haven't morphed, but I'm getting ready to. So we want to resolve the paradox. And see, here's where you morph because they're both talking about an increase in saving. They both have different ideas about what happens when people save more. So I say to resolve the paradox and to morph from Keynesianism to Hayekianism requires three things, actually. Well, we replace the Keynesian cross with the circular... replace the Keynesian cross with the Hayekian triangle. Okay. Now, the way to do that, see, look at this consumption. Let's see. I know I want to go back to where it was there. Look at that level of consumption there. That's consumption that in the Hayek triangle is the vertical leg of the Hayekian triangle, isn't it? I'll blink that at you here, and then make it the Hayekian triangle. Okay, so that's my first. So now I've morphed to Hayek. But what I want to do initially is let's keep the Keynesian conception of how the economy works and just show it using the Hayekian model. That's the Austrian model right there. It's the whole thing, isn't it? So let's show an increase in saving and show what that does to the economy according to Keynes. Here we're showing that Keynes still is using one labor market. It just applies to all the stages of production. Okay, he doesn't make the distinction. And now we show the increase in saving. People are saving more, and of course that constraint shifts along with it. And then when the economy crashes, watch the triangle. All right. Hayek doesn't take into account the interest rate effect. I'm sorry, Keynes didn't take into account the interest rate effect because there is none. Look, the interest is the same as before. And in any case, he didn't think that the economy was responsive to a change in the interest. So he's got not only a reduction in consumption, but a reduction all the way down. And so the triangle is just smaller. He stuck with his early assumption that there's a fixed structure of industry. It doesn't change in shape, only in size. Okay. And again, we've got unemployment all along the production process, all the stages. That's what that says. Now, let's make three changes. Three modifications are needed to transform the Keynesian vision into a Hayekian vision. One is divide the structure into stages. And here I can see it on my screen. I'm not sure you can see it here, but we need to put some vertical lines in here. Let's see if you can see those. Yeah, you can almost see them. See the vertical lines? So you've got stages of production, and they can move differentially. Okay. Secondly, we need to get rid of this demand constraint. Let the economy move along the frontier. So let's relax that constraint. So I'll just reduce it to a very faint line there. Okay. And then the third thing to do is allow for stage-specific labor markets. We don't consider them all the same. We allow for early stage and late stage, labor market at each stage of the production. Okay. You do that, and you've got the full-blown Hayekian model. So what Keynes saw as a paradox of threat becomes what I call, okay, gateway to growth. I try. Okay. Not to be a cheerleader for growth, but that's what it is. So now, for the first time, if you increase the savings, if people decide to save more, it does all the right things. It lowers the interest rate. It causes people to invest more. It moves you along the frontier. It reallocates resources from late stage to early stage to tool up to produce the things that people are saving up for. It's the market at work for you and for me. So let's watch it. Okay, there's an increase in saving. And we see a movement along the frontier. More investment, less consumption. We see a shift of resources to the early stages, which means the economy will grow faster. And we see a wage rate gradient that will shift labor and other resources from the late stages to the early stages. So we get the full morphing now of how you get from Keynes to Hayek. Again, back to this was Hayek's criticism of Keynes at the time. He says, Mr. Keynes' aggregates conceal the most fundamental mechanisms of change. In other words, he lumped all of the stages of production together, added in consumption, aggregated the whole thing, called it expenditures, and he was off to the races. And so Hayek says he's just concealed the market mechanism that can actually make markets work. Okay, thank you much. We do have time for a few questions if anybody, yes sir.
As a final story then, is the reason Keynes became, his policy was adopted because it gave government something it could do.
Sure, it was politically popular.
If Hayek could just say, just keep hands off
right.
and everything will go okay.
Right.
And it was just government's need to get elected or to look like it was being effective is what trumped.
Sure, it was a political popularity. Well, let me embellish on that because I think that's absolutely right, and that's argument number one. That's the big argument of how Keynes won. I like to explain it. I talk in terms of harvesting the votes. The government can pursue policies that will allow them to harvest the votes, and that's spending policies and make work policies, all sorts of things that voters think are good. That can directly benefit some voters and that will bring out the vote. Where laissez-faire doesn't get the votes. Okay, it just doesn't. If you look at the evolution of theory, Keynes was the quintessential demand sider. He's a demand side economist. That's the demand management policies. In fact, it's from Keynesian demand side stuff that gave supply side its name. Supply side policies are all ways of trying to manipulate supply in order to get people's votes. And so, and it works, I don't think as well, or at least except in one election, didn't work as well as demand side policies. But but Austrians advocate neither side policies. Okay, don't manipulate on the demand side, don't manipulate on the supply side. Just back away and let the market work. Okay. Well, that's great. I'll get your vote, get my vote, but overall it's going to, we have a special name for politicians that would make that kind of an argument. They're called losers, okay? I'll give you a follow-up question.
Okay, just to complete the thought. Historically, Keynes was also in government at the end of World War I.
Yeah.
When the Treatise, and he predicted that treaty was going to be devastating to Germany. And it was the biggest public policy failure, and of course he was thrown out on his ear. Mm-hmm. I wonder if he learned his lesson about how to attract politicians.
Well, that's possibly so, but he was right on that. I mean, he just said the reparations assessment was so huge that it would lead to a wild inflation as they tried to pay it off, which happened, and so it probably gained some credibility on that one. I said this argument number one about politically. The second argument, for theoretically and academically, Hayek has capital theory, and that's hard stuff. I give it the simplest, as Hayek did, the simplest exposition I can, the Hayekian triangle. But that's wildly complicating stuff. Whereas the Keynes stuff was very teachable. Samuelson was the first to put the Keynesian cross in textbooks, and it had been there ever since. And you try to teach macro in school, in college on the cheap by playing off income against expenditure and not worrying about the temporal aspect of the process. So it's harder to teach the Austrian stuff. And even at the time, Keynes claimed that he had liberated macroeconomics from capital theory, which was a real crow's nest of ideas. And so he was accused of ignoring capital theory. And rather than say, no, I didn't, he said, yes, that's what I set out to do. I want to get macro off on a different track and give us some policy recommendations without bothering about all those thorny issues of capital theory. And the profession went with him. Yes, sir.
The theory you just presented of Hayek and its triangle, is it related to Schumpeter's process of creative destruction, different stages to the process of emerging and destructing industries and related?
Well, I think it is. I think it is broadly. Schumpeter, when he used that term, he had in mind some pretty dramatic events in the economy, like like the development of the railroad, or major shifts, as opposed to simply keeping the economy tuned in to people's saving preferences. That's not what Schumpeter was about. He was about technological innovation that destroys some value of things that are obsolete, so on. But they're related, and they're both Austrians. I mean, they had a connection there. Yes.
Do you think the low national savings rate in the U.S. is related to decades of accepting the so-called paradox of thrift?
Probably so. Probably so. I mean, it's an ingrained idea. You hear it expressed in Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and so on in the financial press. So I think that's probably true. Yes. Let me go back here.
Are you aware of what's motivating the post-Keynesians? Are they baffled at current events and think, oh, Keynes is trying to explain this, and so they make them.
There are a lot of what I call them adjectival Keynesians, post-Keynesians being one of them. But post-Keynesians have a very hardcore cost of production theory of value. They're Ricardians. They fall back on Ricardo, and their hero is Piero Sraffa, who himself was a Ricardian. So it's a blending of Ricardian production theory and Keynesian demand failures. And it's one of the more bizarre schools, because it doesn't really have a core. It's sort of a grab bag of ideas that don't fit together very well. But that's just one of the, I mean, for years now, no one really claims to be a Keynesian, or very few. They're an adjectival Keynesian, new Keynesian, which is different than neo-Keynesian, by the way, and post-Keynesian, and there's one called hydraulic Keynesian. And there are lots of different Keynesians. Every once in a while, someone will claim to be a non-hyphenated Keynesian. And I was in a debate with one time, and I identified myself as a non-hyphenated Austrian. So now, where does a hyphen not go? Yeah.
Yeah. In your graph, consumption fell, investment grew, but interest rates fell as well. But as soon as interest rates fall, don't people, I mean, I know I want to borrow that and pay for more education or something. I want to consume more.
Yeah, well, that's just the business. See, it's the saving curve that's shifted. Okay, the saving curve shifts, and so it's a hypothetical, or we start out with people's decision to save more for whatever reason. Okay, now the actual quantity saved won't be as much as it would have been had the interest rate not changed.
Okay.
But it did change, so the increase is some, but not quite that much. So it's just a matter of, that's just basic supply and demand analysis. Okay, so yes.
When I hear this two different theories explained in the manner that you're explaining, it reminds me of Copernicus and Galileo and the whole shift of paradigm that happened at that time.
Yeah.
And it was the ability of the new theory to make better predictions and eventually allowed all the scientists to shift from one model to the other. Do you see that happening, or do you see the post-Keynesians sort of continuing to maintain or try to hold on to the old theory in some fashion?
Yeah, everybody's holding on. It's not mainly the post-Keynesians, it's new classicals, and all the more, as time goes by, you get in macro nothing but time series analysis, which just is pure manipulation of the data without any really underlying theory. But I don't see any gravitation towards this. I mean, it would be the highest compliment you could pay to the Austrians to say that they're like the Copernicans as opposed to.
I mean, they are, because that's what happened back then.
Yeah. Well, I'm pleased if people see it that way, but I don't see that winning over a lot of people. Yeah. One more question, and we got to go. Yeah, that's fine.
Well, to follow on that, in his autobiography, Hayek actually suggests, toward the end of his discussion of his relationship with Keynes, and maybe it's just because they were friends and he wants to give his friend the benefit of the doubt, but he suggests that Keynes was actually coming around to his way on certain points. I'm not sure which ones.
Well, coming around on the point of dealing with inflation, that was all. But I only have a limited tolerance for people who talk about what Keynes would have said had only lived a few years, what must have been in the back of Keynes' mind, what, on and on and on. We said what he did while he was alive, and we take that. So I'm much more likely to look at the graph and the general theory and see what that's all about. As opposed to
the comment from Hayek was based on conversation over dinner.
Yeah. So Hayek says, aren't you worried about what your disciples are making out of your current theory? And Keynes says, oh yeah, they're going too far, but if it gets out of hand, I'll just change opinion and fix it. Of course, he died and said, well, okay. Okay, well, I don't want to get into that.